Hey everyone, I'm James Archeri.
And I'm Sandy Sharma, and this is Slated for Tomorrow.
Sandy, who do we have today?
Well, we're joined today by Muneyb, but he has a very illustrious career from being a government chief scientist to a chief technology officer to a CMO. He's probably done innovation in every space you can imagine, from telephony to cloud. He always lives his life on the edge, and right now he's responsible for edge computing. So Muneyb, thank you for joining us.
Paul, thank you for having me, Sandy and James. Pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start with what fuels you, Muneyb. What is your passion? Talk to us about that, and maybe you want to use your career history to tell us that story.
I think curiosity, if I think about it, sum it in one way, in one word, right? So, I did my engineering in electronics and communication, my Master of Engineering in telecommunications. So my first job was I was a researcher in federal government research in Australia in a place called CSIRO, which is Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organization, in areas of telecommunication in those days. Research was interesting. Those were early days of even internet really being there. So I got my hands into trying to say how to kind of shape new protocols on the internet. So I do have an Internet RFC, which is a protocol standard into my name. But then, a lot of that is done in a theoretical way. So I wanted to do it in a practical, hands-on way. And there was even back then, it was proprietary networking closed system. So I got my hand on Linux kernel. So I started contributing to the networking stack of the Linux kernel and, got into open source in that way, because really innovation, that was, and this is early days, and I'll show my age. This is like kernel version 0.66. So I contributed from 0.66 to 2.2.4, which puts, if people know versions and timelines, that's like mid to late 90s. So
Hey Muneyb, I kind of want to dive into that a little bit more, because I met someone actually this week who was like you, academic research, and was looking to get into the real world, if you will, because it sounded like you had the idea of going from theoretical to practical. What was that journey like? And I mean, we'll continue getting into your passion, but I think this leads into your passion. Like, why? What was the trigger for you that said, I'm over theoretical, I want practicality? And was it a hard transition for you, or did you feel that was easy for you?
it was a hard transition, especially surrounded by, right? So I was surrounded in the research organization, if you think about it, by a lot of theorists, right? My boss then, it's funny, he was a cloud physicist. This is a funny story, right? So, and what is a cloud physicist? He was a cloud physicist in the 70s. Was there a cloud? It's not this is the real cloud. This is not the cloud we all talk about. Okay. So he was doing statistical modeling of cloud seeding and then rain modeling, and then going in planes and seeding clouds and, observing those models. But yeah, what was interesting, that's cloud. That's cloud.
That was the OG. When they make cloud, it was literally up in the sky. That's a cumulus. I love that.
So, but they did a ton of work in just simulations. There was nothing real, right? So what was kind of, and you will see as I talk about the progression in my career journey, was at every point, I had to take some risks to get to where I wanted to get to, but it was the curiosity, but the shift from what is theoretical to practical, which kind of drove my purpose. So the shift was hard, but I was surrounded by all the theorists, but there was nothing tangible in the hand. So for me, then going and trying to do simulation models, and I did a few IEEE papers and, published the article, but then, I'll always publish them and they would make it into whatever IEEE, magazine, and I'll be like, now what? Right? I've done this, and I'll tell you the progression. So my Internet RFC protocol is in what is called forces, but the vision back then was to disaggregate the control plane and forwarding plane of network equipment, right? So this back in the late 90s gave birth to software-defined networking. But fast forward, I did that theoretical work. I put that code into open source. I didn't make any money from it. 12 years later, when VMware, which was one of my companies, bought Nicira SDN, the founders, Martin Casado and folks were leveraging a lot of that open source. Like the idea was the same. So, and that got sold to, VMware, recorded, $1.1 billion. I'm going, I had thought about it. I had written open source code for it. I had, done IEEE papers on it. I didn't monetize it, right? So, because I wasn't incentivized to make it real. If I had stayed in the theoretical way, the practical.
And I think, as you said, look for tangible outcomes. Well, I think it's the tangible outcome that's really what you're chasing after that. Your curiosity leads to something that people can benefit from, and you see, value out of doing that whole exercise.
Yeah, no, I think it goes somewhere. Like a lot of good ideas don't go anywhere, and this is kind of a progression, And you will see in my career, then I went from federal government research to Bell Labs, Lucent, Avaya. I started there, and you can imagine the amount of innovation that have happened in Bell Labs and didn't see the light of the day, right? So
for our audience that may not be as technical, but are fascinated, can you give some examples, maybe off the top of your head, like what are some of the awesome things that came out of Bell Labs? Because, Sandy and I know, but I don't think everyone is aware like how powerful of an innovations vehicle it's been.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Where do I start? I literally got goosebumps. But yeah. Well, transistors. So for one, so when again, should I say I'm not that old. The radios, which used to be vacuum tube based, then they moved to more electronic red transistor state. So that came from Bell Labs. That if you can relate to the physical things, if you can relate to the software things, then the C compiler came out. If you're a coder and you're in the new age, C, by the way, if you're not familiar with C, I'm like, well, okay. But if you're, the C compiler came out of there, and tremendous technology progress. And Bell Labs, by the way, is based after Alexander Graham Bell. So the phone system, the old phone system, and by the way, they're not used to the phone system. And probably used to the cell phone system. That's a whole different story. But it was that came after there. So telecommunication, phones, transistors, software, like basic software compiling, all of that came out of the Bell Labs. So it's a huge place of innovation.
Yeah.
Nobel Prize, are all in there. I was kind of fresh person out of college and hanging out with all these folks who had Nobel Prize.
I love that. No, thank you.
The other interesting thing I was going to call out is the paradigm of picking up a phone and hanging up. And even the look of that phone, we have that in our new age today, and it's probably going to stay forever. But the new generation must be wondering, why is it shaped like that? What am I picking up? What am I hanging up? Physically, nothing, right?
No, Sandy, here's a fun story I was doing with my 13-year-old and her friends. And this is there's different versions. There's an online version where, you have different words for this, but you draw something and people have to guess what it is. And so my wife and I were just playing with the kids, and I gave my wife a telephone, and then she drew it the old way. And the 13-year-old just didn't know what it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So we're sitting there going, because she drew the traditional one with a handle, and they're like, and then everybody has to do the guessing. So they were drawing a square box with just this, a flat thing, and nobody could guess it. My wife had done it, and they were trying to guess that one, and no idea what it meant.
Similar one for kids in school. They gave them a floppy disk. And they said, oh, somebody made a 3D print of the save button. Oh, so those are things that are from our generation to the new generation are interesting and fun. But continue the story. So,
well, what I'm hearing from Muneyb is his superpower is like if you just hear him talk about anything, he still stays excited, and he found a way. Like people take that for granted, right? He has found a way to find it at sometimes playful, and his work. Is that a fair, Muneyb, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I immerse myself in what I have and enjoy through it. And if it's not playful and exciting enough, then I'm most likely not doing that. And then I think Sandy has known me long enough to go, I've said no to interesting offers and roles and things because, yeah, they might sound interesting from a title, they may sound interesting from a scope, but it's just not me, so I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, makes sense. So continue on the journey then.
Yeah, no, it is like, we could spend the whole time or just, picking nuggets out. But, I kind of, in the Bell Labs, Lucent, Avaya, I spent 11 years there, but growing from a researcher into R&D to product management to CTO. And it's an interesting journey. Like, when I, again, first came out of college, and got into research, like my vision was, well, I want to retire as the CTO of a company, right, where I can make this technology division, decisions and drive the future and off the technology, etc. And in my 50s, 60s, my career goal was to retire as the CTO. And in my tenure at Bell Labs, spun Lucent, Avaya, I hit that goal in my mid 30s. Then you kind of go, now what?
What's next?
Right. So, and how I arrived at is an interesting story too, because we all presume when we start out in a career at any point, what's your 5-year goal? What's your 10-year goal? What's your long vision? And then, I'm going to do this job. I'm going to grow to my next manager level. And then I'm going my same career path in a serial fashion. And I'm going to get to that goal. And, as I kind of made that quick punch statement, I was like, hey, I wanted in 50s, 60s, retired as a CTO, but I made it in my mid-30s. That didn't happen by fluke or anything. I took risks along the way. So I took risks, again, and James earlier, the curiosity, but also the not just coming up with an idea, how I can actually scale the idea and get people to commercialize and millions of people use it, right? So that was kind of the driver behind. So I was like, I was doing wonderful research. So with the Linux background, with all of this, I was brought into, into Lucent, Avaya to kind of go, it was proprietary systems, make it more open, make it more Linux based and, all of that. So as I was kind of doing the research architecture, then, early days, timing is 2000s, voice over IP was a big thing for people who've been in that kind of world. Is voice over IP is coming, and then from a technology perspective, and how do I make it more commercial? How do I scale it? Because you're always in this old world of, I have, phones with fixed wires and stuff you talk, and voice over IP kind of goes, I have only one network connection, and voice is also going to run on that. How do I drive it for scale for masses? That kind of took me out of that research into more commercial aspect. That led me into like a product management role. Now, if I was still in my research, by the way, in middle, I had, and Sandy, who's been to my office, has seen like 33 patents in my in my world, kind of breaking the boundary on some of these technology barriers.
Did you hear that, guys? 33 patents.
And the patent process is that something that like you need a buttload of lawyers to do, or you know what I mean? Like I feel like there's these legal services out there that you can use and learn.
I'm trying to make it simple for the audience. It was like a routing protocol based patent, right? So, and again, a lot of stories around this. At that point, we'd inherited the FIFA World Cup infrastructure, right? So FIFA World Cup, like Olympics, that you have, right? You have a lot of stadiums and you build them out, just like, if you give the IBM example, IBM used to build us out for Olympics and things like that, right? So you have to go into every stadium, you have to put in, right? So you have to build out entire infrastructure for the stadium and, have it all connected. And so we had won the sponsorship for this, and we had, like, I think a previous company had, like, usually it takes 4 years to build out all of this, because every 4 years you go in and you do the build out of the stadium, build out of the infrastructure, build out of the communication network, blah, blah, blah. 18 months in, the previous sponsor pulled out and we inherited this, right? So my real life challenge was going in and saying, and they had actually built out some infrastructure and networking infrastructure and, connectivity. So, and the team in the company was trying to figure out what was there, because they pulled out and no documentation. So, so they were just trying to discover what's already done. So I came up, my first, patent was discovering all of this, and they had spent 2 months, 3 months in 34 stadiums figuring out what's there, documenting it. I wrote a software which pulled this together in discovery in 30 seconds.
That's amazing.
They were like, that's impossible, right?
Yeah.
So that was my first patent. Now, patent done, problem solved. Yeah. The patent process, getting to the lawyer, I got a lawyer who had no idea about networking because it was all, et cetera. And it took me 3 hours to explain what a packet was in a network to the lawyer. I'm scratching my head going, how am I going to get this advanced technology, passed over to him? What was interesting, I discovered over a period of time, and this is probably the strength of like Bell Labs, Lucent, about having such technology, was I then discovered PhD technologists who would then become, IP lawyers, right? So intellectual property lawyers. So when I kind of then hit them up, the conversation moved so fast, right? And what is amazing, James, to your question was, when I got to the right lawyer who was technology savvy, knew about mine, he actually helped me expand my patent into 2 or 3 different areas, right? Because I was like, I'm solving this problem. And then he was actually pulling me back to go, actually, you could apply. And here's a classic, right? Another patent story. But, if my lawyer had not coached me, the scope wouldn't have widened, right?
Yeah, no, that's very important, because patent, I think a lot of people, it is, the opportunity to protect your intellectual property is very important. However, if you don't have the right support and the right domain experts helping you, you could make it very narrow or not get it at all. And I think that's a very important takeaway. One other takeaway I do want to mention, which is, always been on my mind, both my parents are PhDs. They were researchers. They're very successful, in their fields. However, the same thing, if you're going to be in research and you're not applying it to real life scenarios and not impacting anybody with it, you're too far removed from what the value is, right? You publish the papers, you get some accolades, and that's it.
That evolution in my career and my journey and the curiosity, right? So as I saw good research, trying to commercialize the product and get it out there was a driver for me to kind of shift to product management, because I felt product management is then building product and launching it. So in that capacity, I launched Voice over IP products, making billions of dollars from scratch. Did the first touchscreen for Avaya even before there was an iPhone touchscreen, because
I actually used that, by the way. I've used that in conference rooms.
Yeah. No, that was kind of like the innovation was always, the curiosity drives innovation was there. But, the other point, Sandy, if you don't put it to practical use, you do wonderful research. Another patent, which, drove me to that. And every time, all those patents are driven by necessity. Unlike, I think, James, you said, hey, IBM is like, hey, let's go patents, make some patents, right? Instead of that, it was based by some necessity or something that happened. To me, back in 2000s, again, it's devastating when you hear about active shooter scenarios in campuses and stuff like that. Such an incident had happened, which drove me to think about, one of my patent ideas was, there was an active shooter in a university campus going from one place to the other for an hour before people found out, right? So this was back in mid-2000s. So one of my patents was, today you see it as the Amber Alert, right? So that's actually a patent that I have, was basically, how do you find out if there was geolocation in a cell, if something bad was happening, in this incident, active shooting, or something bad was happening, how do you inform not that cell, but then it's, adjacent cell, so people don't move towards that area but move away from it, and then get to the emergency response in that cell location. So because in that mid-2000s, the active shooter was roaming the entire campus for an hour before people actually could move in. But then how do you do that? That kind of drove personal, I was impacted by listening to that, to say, I have to do something about this as a technologist. How can I isolate this? I can isolate it to maybe one cell. Back then, now with Wi-Fi and geopositioning, we can get a lot more closer. But that was one of the patents that, is like, hey, I want to first make sure people are not moving towards the area of harm, moving away from it.
I think, and that, as you said, is not motivated by commercialization. It's motivated by humanity and doing something good for society and your concern for just the human well-being. So it's that kind of ties it to purpose, right? The purpose is what probably draws all of us to, it has to have a bigger purpose than just my own little accolades of getting papers published. which is awesome.
I'll start with a quote from Spider-Man. With tremendous power comes tremendous responsibility. With tremendous technology comes tremendous responsibility, right? So if you draw the parallels along the way, technology can be used for good and technology can be exploited for not good, right? So, and I think, and then there's a one nature of what is good and what is not good. And it's subjective. You can tell I'm a nerd with, all my action figures and Star Wars and everything else, and Spider-Man and Avengers. But technology has progressed us forward. Like, again, I was telling you about voice over IP, then the next came mobile phones, and this disrupted that. For the purist, where I spent years kind of getting my codecs right for my telephone systems, people I was shocked at how bad the early days of voice quality was on mobile phones, but people put up with it because it gave them the flexibility of doing voice while they were moving around. So people compromised on the quality of voice. I was was an audio engineer doing codecs on Spectrum high fidelity quality audio. I was shocked at how bad even today, my voice quality on mobile phones, if you're not using to high fidelity audio and you're out there, what's wrong with this audio? Right? So, but what I'm getting at is as people adopt technology, I've learned, people start compromising on, things. And what is hard now with ChatGPT, AutoGPT become a norm later on. Like social media happened, social networks happened. People, what about my privacy? What about my, but suddenly it gave, but on the compromise side, they were, privacy was going out the door. But on the other side, it changed free speech. It changed access, like media, which controls free speech. Now every individual controls free speech. Like anybody who had a phone or a system could have free speech and had a avenue for free speech.
So we were just talking about how with great power comes great responsibility, right? And how technology can forward things, but it can also be used for a vehicle for weaponization. And I think the truest point is, though, it comes down to, and Sandy, this is your element of expertise, and maybe Muneyb as well, the importance of morality in your culture and building out responsible humans in that culture, right? Where they're not trying to just skirt by and take advantage of a system, because to your point, free speech is super important, right? And with that comes people potentially leaking documents, as we know that just came out, right? This 21-year-old National Guard was transcribing information, right? In a secret closed location, right? So no cell phones or whatever could get access, but he was literally writing it down, and he was on a Discord channel and decided to share those because he thought that was important. But there are severe consequences of that. And so you've got to ask yourself, it's like, technology is great because Discord's a great tool. People during COVID were playing video games together and were able to talk to their friends and build the social fabric tissues that you needed, right? But then unfortunately, in the hands of some people that don't have maybe didn't get the coaching of the conscience. So how do we dress for that though, right? Because it's not a technology problem. And you can't just be like, oh, if we hear a keyword, quickly shut it down, because you can't program for all those variables or scenarios. What are your gentlemen's thoughts on that?
Yeah. Go ahead, Muneyb, take a shot.
I know you use an example there. Like I got 2 kids. I'm sure, I think we all have generational kids who they are on social media, and it's just an interesting aspect, right? So how do you teach them morally to use all the technology that's at their disposal, right? So it starts at home. It goes like, I know school education, it's interesting. Technology has gone in, like, especially during COVID, all of us were suddenly on, communication channels to do work, to take classes, et cetera. So suddenly everybody got thrown in, and the early days of security problems with the Zoom and with Teams and everything else, right? So, but I feel that's something education has to kind of the ethics, the compliance, the morality has to also be taught at school. I don't think there's any course per se. And I would feel school is actually, schools today don't teach for it. Parents are inequipped for it. So most of folks are inequipped on actually bringing up a generation which can appreciate it and handle it in a proper way. And the amount of injection and evolution of technology, and then what to do with it and how to kind of go around doing this, the ethics around that, the morality around that, less is emphasized on that than there is. Now, that is to tech. Now, if I actually try to draw a parallel to a completely different industry, like the medical industry, there's a lot of ethics, there's a lot of regulation. Like if you had let loose the medical industry like you're doing the tech industry, cloning, all kinds of, genetic babies, that could have all happened, but they have controlled it. Now, does it push forward, innovation? It slowed down innovation. But we saw during COVID that, the way the new, vaccines came about, the way mRNA, the new technologies, like they had to solve for it within a couple of days, right? So that did get accelerated there, but then you still don't know the long-term human implication impacts on people who took the vaccines. You'll figure it out in 10, 15 years. So right? So yeah. But you take the parallels, like I tend to always, this is one of the things I learned from one of my first bosses. My cloud physicist boss was to draw parallels from multiple industries and look at, we are stuck in, first we're stuck in one type of technology. Second, we're stuck in one type of industry. But how can I actually draw parallels from multiple industries and apply what we're doing and learn from multiple industries and segments, right?
So you didn't mention just education, you also mentioned legislation, right? And I think the government and Congress and other folks haven't even figured out what the impact is going to be. So there's this, it's being talked about a lot, that maybe this whole thing, that you cannot release a ChatGPT 4.5 or 5, you got to wait for 6 months. Did we figure out what the impact of this is going to be? At least start asking the right questions and start to put in place at least some
It's changing so
guardrails
fast.
and frame.
Regulators
It's
can't
changing
keep
too
up.
fast. And then, as you said, people are getting on that and improvising. And if you give access to that to do more applications, more, things for good, that's okay. But what about the bad? That's also happening in parallel, and nobody's doubting that one. That's going on. So it's going to be a.
So just think about that, Sandy. You couldn't release a drug like that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So why can't you do it on this technology?
That is a
just
great
drawing the parallels,
analogy,
right?
Muneyb.
I like
It is.
that.
Yeah, it makes sense. The parallel makes sense, but it's not being done.
So, Sandy, to your point, the president of Microsoft, Brad Smith, and their head of legal, right? Because that's his role. He had a smart response. And I mean smart, it's like smart Alec, because obviously we know he's biased to getting their and we saw TikTok. I think TikTok's amazing for growing brands. There's so many small businesses. I saw yesterday a woman use TikTok. She makes $850,000 a year in sales on doing this thing called cash stuffing envelopes. It was this whole Dave Ramsey thing where you would, put your money in an envelope specifically for a thing called cash stuffing. And she created a beautiful, colorful way and started showing it on TikTok and grew her business that way. Right? I think TikTok, like you said, is powerful, but it also has serious ramifications because of the doom scrolling and the mindless. Yeah, go ahead.
No. I think on the legislation aspect, like I tend to, and if you haven't figured this out, like you can see me draw parallels from industries. And I also draw parallels from geographical locations. So on legislation, again, point in time, if people, if you go across the pond to Europe, and they implemented something called GDPR, which is data privacy for general public, and everybody who's an individual, a citizen of Europe, can have their data privacy. Then they can demand. I'm simplifying it. It's complicated with 100 different kind of laws and legislations. But simply put, as a citizen, you could demand what your digital footprint is from all corporations and then ask to be, wiped or whatever, right? So suddenly, I would say mid-2000s, like 2016, 2015, 16, when Europe started putting GDPR, completely changed the design, the architecture, the cybersecurity, the entire IT infrastructure, the clouds. They completely had to change because what did it do? It was a legislative decision, but what it drove by EU, but it drove a complete re-architectures of sovereign clouds in country, data privacy, the whole technology turned around to meet the regulation, right? So you have to just look across the pond and draw upon. Sandy, you asked me about what legislation can have an impact, can have a complete shift on technology to incorporate legislation if done right.
And then in that situation, the cloud physics actually changed because you had to consider on-prem technologies, you had to consider hybrid, you had to consider public cloud, and public cloud became stronger and better as well over time. So it accelerated the concerns around privacy, security, and sovereignty, which it would not have happened if the legislation didn't happen, right? So in that case, it actually helped technology evolution. So if you get legislators and technologists to actually work together in tandem, and it's a little bit of civilized capitalism, right? That you're thinking about the impacts and thinking about what it might do for humanity in advance versus just getting your commercial needs to be in the forefront. I think that would help a lot. And I think Congress pushes it sometimes, but I think there's more to be done by the tech leaders and Congress to actually work together versus find yourself painted in a corner and then react, because that's what mostly happens.
Another thing, Muneyb, I'd love to learn from you is because we all are faced with trials in our career, right? And those pivotal moments that help you go to the next level, maybe.
Personally, again, in my career, one was, research analyst, researching, writing code, then making it into a product. You think you're solving problems, but, my first one was, those examples. One from, this was Department of Veteran Affairs. It's Veteran Affairs. So people calling in and, wanting to, these are really elderly people and retired and, they're trying to get their pension or health kind of inquiries. And my system is down. So I'm kind of flown in a plane, thrown in a room, and then they this has been down. We need you to. And, IBM is the technology provider. You have really affected people and things like that in one instance. So, I arrive, I'm the architect of all of this. So they think magically I'm going to solve everything. And, that's not always the case, right? So fortunately, I was able to figure it out in a couple of hours and have a solve for it. But the heat of the moment. So James, you were I had not been exposed to what impact what I had done would do to pensions, healthcare providers. Yeah. And that moment of realization that, oh my God, my stuff, my thing I built has this kind of human touch and impact. Mm-hmm. Then therefore I have to be more thoughtful in what I do because it has such a, but the moment itself was very hot. Angers were flying. Yeah. Everybody was red. Everybody yelling at me. I walked in and how should I react? Should I yell back? And it's it's your problem. I figured out a problem wasn't because of my stuff. It was other stuff, which is always the case. But then I grew up I grew up because this was one of the technology aspects when
moment.
I have a dedicated phone network, but now in voice over IP, I'm sharing that with internet traffic. right? So the issue wasn't what I had done; it was the other network infrastructure, blah blah blah. But I had to calmly, like I grew up within those few hours. I grew up in rationally solving the problem, but in a diplomatic way, coming out and saying the solution is not my problem. It's easy to say point fingers at other people, but pointing not just fingers, but also having a solution for that. So I grew up within those 4 or 5 hours in a very heated situation. And, and when people are being affected and then solving for the greater good and then having a solve for it in how to handle tough situations, still have a problem and move everybody forward and not have, people all fighting over each other. Right?
I think you just, by the way, stated your superpower. Because I've seen you in action now for what? We've known each other almost 10 years now. And I've seen you do this again and again, Muneyb. You are never focused on your agenda or what you might be bringing to the table or covering your own A to say, right? That's not what you're trying to do. You're always looking at the bigger picture, including everybody in and working together to kind of get to the end goal. And you do it very calmly. You do it very pleasantly. And that's I think it's very disarming for everybody else because you make everybody feel safe. And intellectually, I've seen you to be the smartest in the room, but nobody feels that. And everybody feels they're getting to contribute and they're all involved in kind of shaping it. I love that, by the way. And I'm going to give you back the floor to say, what do you think your superpower is? But that's what I've observed, which is pretty
thank
incredible.
You, Sandy. No, it is usually, you find out about this when you hear from others. Like, they're, again, it's not, thank you for that first. But, I think, I'm a constant learner, so it's always kind of good to hear. But I go about doing my things to solve, but it's good to always, I'm not somebody who goes, hey, here's my XYZ superpower. It's just, I get stuff done. It's good to hear you gonna come back and say, hey, I think that's your superpower. But, I think, thank you. And I think that might be it. I have no idea. But I felt it was always trying to understand the toughest technology and because I'm always technologist at heart, like, and simplify it for people can understand what it is. But I think that's, but no, thank you. I think it's also diffusing I have fun myself. Like once you go do that, by the way, this is the nature of the beast, right? So once I went in and solved that problem, I got thrown into similar problems because they thought, oh, this guy can get into really tough situations and solve this. So at one end of the spectrum, it was, let's say, Department of Veteran Affairs. But on the other end of the spectrum, I was flown over to a trading floor of a large bank down because every second was loss of billions of dollars on a trading floor. And I was thrown into that mix, right? So, and I walked in, thankfully, and solved that problem too. High pressure again, but I solved that problem because everybody's looking at me and going,
Situations, right? Tech ER, emergency room, tech emergency room. The triage, tech triage. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, I think that's also got me to like where I am, right? So I think, hey, the technology
Tell me about that
world,
inflection point because this is the dark side now.
No, dark side to moving to the I was kind of recruited into VMware because I think VMware was going through hypervisor to data center kind of inflection point, but more on the product marketing, go-to-market aspect of it. I think the feeling was, and I think my kind of inflection point there was, again, technology evolution. Everything was going to software based. I'd lived my life in, infrastructure, like, building out this software abstraction, going to cloud, what's happening. So, but then, the curiosity was, yes, I build all of this, product management, all of this, but why are people not getting what I'm trying to say? So what is missing out? Seems like the communication, the positioning, the messaging, why could it waste this cool technology and people articulate it in a simple way? Maybe I have to go and do this and communicate to everybody myself, and I have to learn about simplifying this, right? So
yeah, so I love it. I love that you there's this book, or there's this phrase about knowing your audience, right? And then
it makes it disingenuous and may not be authentic. That may not be what you folks are doing, but I believe in reality, whether it's any research or any product, if it's not built for providing real value and real desirability to the humans you're making it for, you're never going to win anyway. And later, it's like putting lipstick on a pig, right? Oh, we got something built. Now let me find a clever way to market it, a clever way to competitively position it. But if you grounded it in real human needs, in real human emotions,
problem. I'll tell you, Desha, and this is again back to everything we've been talking about, from ChatGPT, etc.
Yeah.
Day one, starting with what problem, what are you solving, what for what. So call it market need, customer need, audience need, people need, and then building to solve for that. I think it's a lost art. What's happened with more technologists, and
Keep going. Yep.
and in startup, what do you have? What's the magic formula for startup? You find a couple of PhDs, you're solving a tech problem, right? So that's the
You're not solving the human problem.
You got it.
Yeah.
So you're solving the genesis of how the design of any small part of a startup, 3 or 4 engineers, PhD students, they're solving a technology problem, and then trying to figure out with VCs and investors in what is my product market fit. So what you're addressing, Sandy, is a very fundamental
Problem
issue that we
in the
have problem
industry.
industry we've gone away, because there have been so many. There's a flurry, and this is flurry of startups, a flurry of investment, a flurry of universities, a flurry of engineers and PhDs coming out of the universities. This wasn't the norm if you take 30, 40 years ago. There's only a few of them coming out, and these things didn't happen at the rate of pace that happened. That has changed to the point, Sandy, that we face ourselves that a lot of the leaders today are technologists, and they think about technology problems first, and then they come and try to figure out how to fit it, right? So
I'd like to stay on this one. This is hot. So I have to add a couple of other things to it. There's startups doing this. Big tech companies are doing this. Now, here's the problem. With COVID, everybody needed to get digital, right? Now, even traditional companies are doing this. So I was talking to somebody who's heading digital innovation at a big bank, okay? And they have 13,000 people in that innovation team. In those 13,000, 12,600 are technologists, okay? 250, God bless them, are product owners, at least those many. And there are about 50 to 100 people thinking about journeys and wants and needs and actual human needs. So now look at the ratio, how badly skewed it is. If you're so heavily weighted on just the technologists, how are you going to get the
You're
mix
just building
right?
out features.
Yeah. Or just geeking out.
Can I say
sorry,
that's why
James,
I thought it was really cool. I thought it was really cool with the, because back in 2016, 2017, design thinking was taking over by storm, right? Everyone was like, design thinking workshops, design thinking, it takes like complete in your face when every consulting firm has a design thinking offering, right? Once all the 4 are saying like, we have design thinking as a service, you're like, wait, what? As a service? Yeah, pay as you go, and we'll come up and do sticky notes. But I love that recently.
I love how you dumbed
recently
it
though.
That was beautiful, by the way. I loved how you dumbed it down.
Sticky notes.
It's the service will come and put sticky notes for you. Keep going. But companies are paying a lot of money for those sticky notes, and it's stupid.
So
you
but
do it as
to
a,
your
by the way, sorry, just to
point-
kind of call that out, I want to take a little dig at that. You do the workshop, you do the sticky notes, you produce the posters, everybody does high fives, and then when you leave the room, what do? You just go write code. You don't look at what you thought about, and you don't stay true to the actual sentiment, and you don't actually ever do more discovery with actual customers throughout the life cycle. That's what keeps you humble. If you actually had a way to know
why,
at every iteration.
Sandy, yeah, which is why. So one of the biggest problems with, for those that don't know, design thinking was literally this idea that you start with a persona, like who's the person you're solving for, what is the problem to be had, and then you try to figure out like what is the current frustration they have, what is the future state. But the problem, to Sandy's point, is all of a sudden you do the persona activity and then you just run it, you forget them, and there's no more human element anymore. And what I loved was this whole concept of human-centered design, which, to your point, Muneyb, is always about what is the human experience we're solving for throughout the process. Like, it is always embedded, because you're right. Like, there's been plenty of times, like, because I was a former consultant in my past life, where, you could do a technology solution but you didn't think about what are the potential ramifications that once a human had to bring it on, like, actually causes more steps for them. Even though it reduces tech steps, it causes more physical steps, which then slows down maybe the QSR's, flow. So anyway, I love that we're calling out human-centered is where you should keep your focus on. How do you solve for the human experience? And what is the human experience? Because
So is that what got you into marketing, my friend? To be real?
Yeah, it did, right? So it is kind of like an interesting thing on the move, right? So it's just, how do we actually get to the people? How do they, correlate with that? And, from the development side, again, James, to your point, the human experience, and if it's a big company, what happens is you put the sticky boards, it's still the stickies, and then it's a big product you're building. It gets broken into, 10, 15, 20 stories. Each of them are doing individual story builds, and nobody's thinking about how all that comes together again. All right. So a big company problem a lot of the times is, yes, the design thinking is good. I broke it into user stories. I broke it into that, but then I have multiple of them. How does it actually come together? By the time it comes together, it doesn't look one continuous human experience flow. It's pretty choppy and broken out in a big company. Smaller companies stay true because they don't have the resources to go off. But then I think they narrow down their problem because they have a product market fit issue that they're trying to solve and
in all
stay afloat.
fairness, I think the big companies are solving it with, if you do outside-in mapping of what the human touch points and the needs are, and you do service design. So you use actually enterprise architecture to see what is the service design underneath to enable those moments. And then it actually can come together. Then it's not classic user story breakdowns with take epics, make user stories, but you're doing a service design. If you do service design, that includes marketing touch points, sales touch points, physical touch points, digital touch points, plus my product woven in. If you design it that way, then it becomes a much better way to
what you're talking about is, again, my evolution. As I kind of explored, my first jump into marketing was, all this technology I understand, I have to make it more simple and appealing and stuff like that. But as I emerged in, you can still say that for my talk track, I'm pretty technology at heart, but everything you just articulated, Sandy. No, but what got me fascinating was now MarTech stacks in the back end. I started observing within my marketing world that I had expertise, creative, branding, messaging, positioning, understanding all of that. But marketing was suddenly becoming very tech savvy because the stacks and the backs were getting very technology. And that, by the way, the technologist in me kind of going, whoa, this is interesting. I have CRM, I have, digital experiences, I have analytics, I have, loops, I have all of this, interesting aspect. Feels like traditional marketing folks are overwhelmed with the technology integrations of how all of this comes together. So they're struggling. They're not going. I saw that everybody was struggling to leverage the technology in the back end and do an effective job of automating marketing significantly. And they just felt that, I saw this, by the way, personally. I saw really good CMOs. I got really powerful marketing people suddenly look at MarTech stacks and go, I have no idea I am what to do with this or how to leverage. Like I know I have demand creation, I have this, I have to drive pipeline, but how to leverage because they felt that the technology muscle in them was kind of challenged, right? So that's kind of like as I evolved on that side. By the way, I look for technology, like so MarTech stack, like this is again at VMware trying to build out. We had to go and we had a traditional environment, but then we had to go and build out a completely MarTech stack that is like cloud.vmware.com, which is very immersive. Have people come, try, learn, try, buy, everything in one motion. That kind of gave the appetite, again, technology driver and curiosity to go, oh my God, we're way behind. We have to actually how to solve this, and you actually need a technologist who's tech savvy to also understand the MarTech stack and put it to the full effect of closed loop, i.e., I can create inbound, outbound motion. How do I close the loop? Have analytics, then do something with the analytics to engage better and drive better, engagement and performance. That, again, that got me curious.
What's your prediction on this space? You told me about the percentage of workloads moving. What's going to happen to our lives?
Well, I feel, and this is very immersive to, the conversations with AI and ChatGPT, et cetera, the augmentation of human and technology at the edge, like this is where the real physical meets the digital, is going to drive an evolution of usability. Like today, we have attuned people to technology. Like we're all experts in setting up, opening and booting laptops and, logging in with passwords and biometric so we brought people to technology. The future is where technology goes and embeds and immerses itself into our existing processes.
Perfect. Well, any other links or recommendations you'd have for our listeners?
No, personally, I think there is, follow us and, I think Intel, VMware, like both places, we do a lot of tech for good. So, you find me in my LinkedIn more so, putting together, hey, how we're actually changing lives for folks in the community and doing tech for good. So there's a lot of charitable causes we can contribute towards. So that's a big passion of mine. So I think, we try to do it through the corporation. So
awesome. Well, Muneyb, thank you for being here with us.
I really appreciate getting to meet you. But Sandy, this is your friend, so I'll let you send it out. I'm your host, James Archeri.
And I'm Sandy Sharma. Until next time.